We are in 1 Samuel chapter 2, and the way that we grow up, or the way that we're raised, is extremely important. Extremely important. Those early foundations that are set up can really affect us either positively or negatively for the rest of our lives. I did not grow up in a Christian home, but what very few people do know about me is that I did actually, for a couple of years, very, very early in my life, very, very early, very young, I actually I attended a Christian school for a couple of years. Now, my family did not know what in the world they were doing. They just were trying to get me a good education. And so they took me to this Christian school and signed me up. And the Christian school said, great, we'd love to have them. You're going to need to buy them a Bible. So I showed up on the first day of school, little kid, and I had my Catholic Bible. And they had to call mom and say, hey, this is the wrong Bible. She didn't have a clue what she was doing. She, again, just trying to get me good education. I wasn't there for very long, obviously, like I said, just a couple of years, very, very young. But I do believe, in looking back, that the impact that, and the things that I was learning, the impact of all of that came to fruition many, 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 many years later, when I was 20 and finally surrendered my heart to the Lord. I believe that there were some foundations, some biblical foundations that were built way back then when I was just a tiny little kid. Back in the good old days when you could paddle kids in school. I remember getting paddled at that school because I wasn't a Christian, man, so I was there misbehaving. But the way that we are raised, the influences that we have around us at that time in those young years, and throughout life, obviously, but in those young years, seem to be especially important. And we were introduced to Samuel last week, and Samuel is this little boy who was born to a mom that couldn't have kids, and now, in between chapter 1 and chapter 2, she's now keeping her vow to the Lord and dropping him off in a place called Shiloh at the tabernacle or the sanctuary, or essentially their place of worship. Their church is essentially what it was. And she's dropping off, these parents, Hannah and her husband Elkanah, are dropping off their son. And we will see that there are some great opportunities and some terrible influences, and so it is that mix. And we'll see just exactly what Samuel does and how he responds to that, and what God does in the life of Samuel in those early years. Let me remind you very quickly, this is how the entire book is broken up. Chapters 1 to 7, we're going to see Samuel, focused on him. Chapters 8 to 15, we will get introduced to Saul. And then chapters 16 to 31, we will be introduced to David. But for today, 1 Samuel chapter 2, we will see it primarily has to do with prayer and prophecy. And so we will jump right into it here in verse 1. We read this, that Hannah, so the word and connects it to whatever was going on before. At the end of chapter 1, she had brought her son Samuel, again, to leave him with the priests there in order for him to be surrendered to the Lord and for him to start serving the Lord at a very young age. Some Bible teachers think that he might have been about 3 years old. Some think that he might have been as old as 13. I tend to lean toward younger, that he was a younger child, and I will tell you why as we go through it. I think there are some verses in here that describe things having to do with a little kid, but we'll get into it here in verse 1. So Hannah, his mom, prayed. And so what I did was I called this section, verses 1 to 11, a prayer of praise. Now, most often when we think about prayer, we think about asking something, requesting something. Hannah is not doing that. She's actually, as she's praying, she's simply praising God. She's not asking for anything. She's just making God known. And she does that in two ways. Number one is found in verses 1 and 2. This is our first subpoint. She makes it known that God is sovereign. Now, sovereign means that if someone is sovereign, it means that they are the greatest. They're above all others. And certainly we would describe God that way, as being sovereign. He is the sovereign God. He's more powerful. He's higher than anybody else. And so here's what she said in describing this. And Hannah prayed and said, "My heart rejoices in the Lord," which is an astounding thought and statement because she's dropping off her son. Most moms, when their son or their daughter is that young, are not excited about dropping them off. Unless they've been at home with them the entire time, and then they go, "You know what? I'm dropping you off at daycare for a couple of hours," and it's a welcome break. Now, as you get older, your parents may be glad to drop you off somewhere, like, "Get out of the house for a while," depending on how things are at home. But she's dropping off her little child, her firstborn, the only son that she has. And yet she's rejoicing in the Lord. Now, why is she rejoicing? Well, it's not because she dislikes her son at all. But notice what her heart is doing here. My heart rejoices in the Lord, not in the fact that she had to drop off her son. We're not necessarily thankful for the difficult times in our lives. We don't say, "You know what, God, thank you so much that my little dog at home is sick and getting ready to die." That's not what we do, and that would be abnormal. But what we do is, "Lord, thank you that you're in control. And though this bad thing is happening, which I don't like, God, I thank you that you're still in control." And that's what she's doing here. My heart rejoices in the Lord. She says, "My horn is exalted in the Lord." Now, what does it mean, horn? Well, the word horn, oftentimes in the Bible, is symbolic of strength. So she's saying, "My strength is in the Lord." You go, "Well, where did you get that from?" Well, you think about a bull or a ram. They have horns. They're strong animals. That's the idea. My horn is exalted in the Lord. It's lifted up. My strength is lifted up in the Lord. How does a mom leave her son and say, "See you next year"? Well, she has the strength to do that because her strength is exalted in the Lord. The Lord is doing that. She says, "I smile at my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation." Now, we know from the previous chapter that she is one of two wives to Elkanah. We talked about the difficulties of that last week and talked about how that was not ideal and there was a price to be paid for it, and they certainly were paying for it, this couple, this family. And so she may be talking about Peninnah. If you were here last week, Peninnah is the other wife. And she may be referring to her when she says, "I smile at my enemies." But she doesn't expressly say that. She just says, "I smile at my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation." Now, you'll notice the language also. She seems to address those that are listening to her or might hear her or within earshot. But then she also turns and talks to God directly. And then she talks to people, and then she talks to God. My heart rejoices in the Lord. So she's talking to other people. My horn is exalted in the Lord. She's talking to other people. I smile at my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. She then turns her attention directly to God. And then in verse 2, no one is holy like the Lord, she says, she declares, for there is none besides you. So she turns and talks to God. And then she says, nor is there any rock like our God. So she then turns and talks to everybody else again. So she's switching back and forth here. There is this public address and then a personal address. Now, the sovereign part of our subpoint there really is shown in verse 2. No one is holy like the Lord. Now, what she's declaring is, there are holy people, but no one is holier than the Lord. So he's the holiest. And then she goes on to say, for there is none besides you, talking to God. There's no one else who can measure up. That's sovereignty. He's the top. He's in charge. Nor is there any rock like our God. Now, in calling God a rock, what she's doing is not disrespectful at all or silly. She's referring to him as her stability. You're my stability. And no one is like you, God. We are, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but we're in a trailer right now. Did you know that? We're in a trailer. This is a trailer. If they wanted to move it, they would come and put the tires back on it, and they would pull out, they would connect the hitch, and then they would bring a big truck and they would roll this thing right on down the road. Right now, it is sitting on some stands that are underneath us, and those stands are sitting on cement, squares of cement. And when she says here in verse 2, nor is there any rock like our God, that's the idea. She's saying, my life is built upon a sturdy foundation, and there's no other foundation like you, God. Now, she goes from talking about the sovereignty of God to then pointing out the fact that God is just. Now, justice is a huge term, a very popular term right now. We have so much political and social conflict all over the world, but even here in the United States. We saw it this week in Minnesota. It's all over the place. We're seeing it in LA. It's everywhere. There's unrest everywhere. And we oftentimes think of justice as something that, is that's just something that somebody out there made up. They were wrongly killed or they were harmed, and so we got to get justice. Well, you may be surprised to find out that justice it actually originated with the Bible. God was the first one to be just or fair. And here she is pointing out that God is just. Now, this is different ways that you can do this. But the way that she does it is that from verses 3 to 11, she's going to point out, really from verses 3 to 10, but I put verse 11 in there also. What she's going to do to express to us or to demonstrate for us that God is fair or just, she's going to repeat herself in several different ways. And the way that she's going to do that is she's going to tell us, hey, God is doing the opposite. You're going to see there's going to be this contrast. Well, this person does this, but God does this. So let's look at it. Verse 3. Talk no more so very proudly is the first thing she says. Don't be proud. Let no arrogance come from your mouth. Don't be proud, don't be arrogant, for the Lord is the God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. So the point there is, be careful what you say with your mouth, because God is weighing out everything that you say, and he's the one that judges. He brings justice. Verse 4, the bows, that's like a bow and arrow, the bows of the mighty men are broken. So her point is that the mighty men have these bows, these warriors, God breaks their bows. Verse 4, and those who stumbled, in other words, they were weak, are girded with strength. So do you see what she's doing? She's showing us by contrast and saying, the mighty men, as far as God is concerned, they're now weak. The weak people, they're now strong. God is just. He's turning the tables. He's doing the opposite. Verse 5, those who were full have hired themselves out for bread. Why'd they do that? Because they're hungry. They were full, but now they're hungry. And the hungry have ceased to hunger. They stopped being hungry. Why? Because they were full. Even the barren, she knows about being barren. She was barren. She couldn't have kids. Even the barren has borne 7. So even the barren, the lady who was barren, the lady who was barren, now has 7 kids. How did that happen? God did it. And she who has many children has become feeble, because having kids is a demonstration of strength, right? A mom that has lots of kids is obviously a strong woman, able to carry and care for and nurture those children. And so she's saying God is flipping the tables here, making everything upside down and right side up. Verse 6, the Lord kills and makes alive. It's God who decides. It's God who has control over life and death, she's saying. In verse 6, he brings down to the grave, but he also brings up. So some people he takes down to the grave. Other people he raises from the dead. And we see that in the scriptures. God can do that. Verse 7, the Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and lifts up. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the beggar from the ash heap. To set them, look what he does with them, to set them among princes and make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he has set the world upon them. We get a great demonstration of that, a picture of that in Joseph in the Old Testament, who was in Egypt as a slave and ended up being wrongfully accused and going to prison. And then what did God do? God rescued him from prison and put him in a position really of Pharaoh. He wasn't Pharaoh, but the Bible says that Pharaoh gave him charge of everything, so that Pharaoh didn't even know what was really going on in the kingdom.
I think they said he was pretty much second to Pharaoh.
He was second to Pharaoh, but basically he was first. Pharaoh didn't give up his throne. Egypt wasn't going to allow him to do that, but he basically put Joseph in charge of everything. So God demonstrating these verses that he took him from the ash heap, so to speak, to being in command of Egypt. And notice in verse 8, this has been a problem for people who criticize the Bible. She says, "For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he has set the world upon them." People have read that, critics, and have said, there it is. The Bible is inconsistent. It's not trustworthy because it doesn't align with science. Here's Hannah. She thinks that the world is sitting on pillars. Everybody knows it's not sitting on pillars. Well, keep in mind that Hannah is praying this, and it is poetic. I actually would have no problem calling this Hannah's psalm. If you've read through the Psalms before, you know that this sounds like a psalm. You go, well, yeah, this is something like David might have wrote, or Solomon might have wrote, or one of the other authors. And so it's a prayer, but it really is this psalm. And so there is it seems to be some poetic language here. And I do not think for a moment that Hannah thinks that there's actual pillars under the earth. The point that she's trying to make is consistent with what she's saying. She's saying God is holding everything up. She's imagining these pillars under the earth, and she's saying those pillars are holding the earth, but God is holding the pillars, is essentially what she's saying. But whether she believes, she didn't have the privilege of seeing pictures or video of Earth. We do, right? We've sent men and women and even monkeys into outer space. And we've gotten pictures back and videos of the earth. We know that it's not sitting on pillars. Hannah didn't have that opportunity or that privilege, but I do not think that Hannah really thought that there were pillars. She's simply trying to demonstrate, trying to express that God is sustaining all things. Verse 9, she continues, "He will guard the feet of his saints, but the wicked shall be silent in darkness. For by strength no man shall prevail." She says in verse 10, "The adversaries of the Lord's enemies, shall be broken in pieces. From heaven he will thunder against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed." Now, as she's praying this prayer and praising God, something very interesting happens here in verse 10. I believe that it is prophetic. There's a prophecy here. She says, "The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken in pieces. From heaven he will thunder against them." Now, there are countless times throughout the Bible where we see God demonstrate his power against his enemies. Some of us have been through Joshua. We went through Joshua together, and we saw God fight for his people then and break the enemies into pieces, like what we're reading here. But this is all also, it reminds us of end time events. When Jesus comes back to earth, we're told that he will come riding on a white horse. And there will be armies on earth fighting in the valley of Megiddo, and they will all turn their assault weapons, their weapons, at this thing that's coming out of the sky, that's thundering from the sky against them. It will be Jesus. And they will turn their weapons at him and foolishly try to eliminate him. He will speak and eliminate all of them in an instant. So I believe that this is a verse that is looking forward to that time. But she doesn't stop there. She says the Lord will judge the ends of the earth, and that's part of that judgment in the end times. You can read about that in the book of Revelation. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He's sovereign. He can judge. But then she says this in verse 10. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Now, walk with me for just a moment. He will exalt his king, or he will give strength. He will give strength to his king. Now, many of you have studied with me. We've gone through, you weren't here back for Genesis, and most of you were not here for Exodus, but maybe some Leviticus, some Numbers, some Deuteronomy. We then went through Joshua, and then we went through Judges. We went through Ruth. We've come to 1 Samuel. So let me ask you this. Up to this point in their history, as we get to 1 Samuel, have they had a king yet? No, they have not. Do they have a king at this time? No. So when she says he will give strength to his king, who in the world is she talking about? They do not have a king. Well, that's why it's prophetic. It's looking forward to something that was coming after Hannah. Now we know, because a few minutes ago as we started our study, I told you that we're going to be introduced to, we've been introduced to Samuel. We are going to be introduced to Saul and David in this book. Who is Saul? Does anybody know who Saul is?
Paul.
Not Paul. Well, I'm sorry. There is a guy named Saul/Paul in the New Testament. But in this book, in 1 Samuel, does anybody know who Saul is? There's going to be a guy named Saul.
The first king.
Yes, Josh, yes. The first king. The first king. So they won't have a king. The first king is coming, but he's not there yet. So when she says that he will give strength to his king, what is she talking about? And then she goes on to say, and exalt the horn, or the strength of his anointed. So we know what a king is. What is the anointed? The anointed, that means that is referring to somebody that is going to do something special for God. They're going to be a king, they're going to be a prophet, they're going to be a priest. They're being chosen for some special task. What they would do, the Hebrews would do, is they would take some oil, some olive oil, and they would pour that on them in order to symbolize the power of God, to symbolize the Holy Spirit of God. We will see that in this book with Samuel. We will see it most notably with Saul. With Saul and then with David. David will be anointed. We'll see that. It's a very popular story. He'll be anointed. So when she says here, he will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed, it's very possible that this prophecy is referring to Saul and referring to David. You go, well, yeah, they're going to be king, 1 and 2, and they'll be anointed, so it's very possible. However, and I think that is a partial fulfillment, but I think that there's also something else going on here. The word anointed there is spelled M-A-S-I-A-H. M-A-S-I-A-H. Masiah. It's pronounced Mashiach. Mashiach. And what it means is Messiah. Well, wait a minute. We know someone that's a Messiah, right? We know someone that's it's Jesus' character that we're introduced to in the New Testament. It's Jesus. So I believe that she's given us a partial fulfillment that, hey, Saul and David, God's going to anoint them. They're going to be strengthened by him. But I think that ultimately this is a reference to Jesus. He's the coming king, isn't he? He's the king, and he is the Mashiach, or the Messiah, Jesus. So very, very interesting here. Another interesting point to make here before we move on is that if you were to go to Luke chapter 1, verses 47 to 55, you would find there something called Mary's Magnificat. That means Mary's special praise or special song. She sings a song to God. And what you'll find there is if you compare the two, Hannah's psalm or prayer of praise, and Mary's song, her Magnificat, what you would find is that there are a lot of similarities there. A lot of the same wording. Why is that? Well, because Mary would have been familiar with this godly woman, Hannah, from way, way back over in 1 Samuel. And she must have studied this passage, been familiar with it, so that when she had a chance to compose a song and to sing it, those words were replaying in her mind and in her heart. And that's what we want. We want for God's word. We want to be so familiar with God's word that when we go to give thanks or to give praise to God or we go to talk about God, that we've got his word in our minds and that's what comes up. So that I'm not just making stuff up about God, but what I'm relaying is truth that I already know from his word. So that's what Mary ends up doing. Now, in verse 11, it says, Then Elkanah, that's Hannah's husband, went to his house at Ramah, but the child, that's Samuel, ministered to the Lord before Eli the priest. And the word ministered simply means served. That little child stayed there and served. Now, verse 11 says, but the child ministered. Some people think that he could have been as young as 3. Others think he could have been as old as 12 or 13. We do not know. But the fact that the Bible calls him a child, I think means that he's on the younger side. But neat to think that he was a child and he was already there serving the Lord by helping Eli the priest. Now, with that in mind, we move on to our second main division, which is problematic priests. You've got Eli, who's the high priest, and his 2 sons, which we've already met, Hophni and Phinehas. Those 2 guys are serving as priests also. It says, now the sons of Eli, verse 12, were corrupt. In fact, here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the sons of Eli first in verses 12 through 17. These are the problematic priests. The sons of Eli were corrupt. They did not know the Lord. Now, some of your translations may actually say the sons of Eli were called the sons of Belial. You go, what is the son of Belial? Not Baal, Belial. That's Satan. They were actually referred to as the sons of Satan. And why? It's because they were corrupt. And it says there at the end of verse 12, they did not know the Lord. That's why they were corrupt. Now you go, wait a minute. Weren't they priests? Yes. Wasn't their dad a priest? Yes. But let this be a lesson to you. Now the equivalent for you and I today, we're very familiar with this, church families. Church families. Oh, I was not raised in church, but some people, you know what? I was raised in church, I've just always been in church. Being in church all of your life does not guarantee that you are right with God or that you're righteous or that you're holy or that you're actually a Christian. Did you know that God does not have grandchildren? God's not a grandfather. What do I mean by that? I mean that you and I, cannot get into heaven or in right standing with God by saying, well, I'm not a Christian, but my mom is. Well, I'm not a Christian, but my grandmother is. God doesn't have any second generation kids. We're either his children or we are not. And being in church or spending your entire life in church does not guarantee that you are a Christian. Now, I don't really have to explain that to you because you all know that. You've been in church long enough. You don't have to be in church any longer than 10 minutes to know that there are some phony balonies in church. Everybody here knows that. You meet fake people at church all the time. So that's demonstrated for us. We know that. We know people. You probably know people right now. Yeah, they're in church, but they're not the real deal, man. And that person, man, they're just putting on a show. They're not really into it. Well, this is a classic church family here. Eli and his 2 sons. And Eli seems to be committed to the Lord, seems like it, but his sons most definitely are not. They don't even know the Lord. And you go, but they're serving. Yeah, here's what's going on. They belong to a family of priests, the priesthood. It was started with a guy named Aaron way back when, and they're part of that family, so they're automatically priests. But what's going on is these two sons are not committed to the Lord. They've got the clothing, the outward appearance, right? Probably had some Christian t-shirts or something, said something about Jesus, or maybe a cross or something or whatever. And they looked like, they're like the godly people or whatever. But they were not. They were phony. And so we're finding out about them. So it says in verse 13, and the priests, talking about Hophni and Phinehas. Here's what they would do. The priest's custom with the people was that when any man offered a sacrifice, the priest's servant, so these two guys would send out their servants, would come with a 3-pronged flesh hook in his hand while the meat was boiling. So as somebody comes and there was different kinds of sacrifices. Some would be thrown directly onto the coals, some would be cooked, some would be boiled. As they were doing that, a servant of the priest would come with a 3-pronged flesh hook. In other words, a hook with 3 hooks on it. Okay? And here's what they would do, verse 14. Then he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot, however it was being cooked. And the priest would take for himself all that the flesh hook brought up. So they did in Shiloh, that's where this was, to all the Israelites who came there. So you would come and you would show up and you would say, you know what, I brought this food, this meat that I'm going to sacrifice to the Lord. Some of the sacrifices required that you bring a goat or a lamb. So you show up with your goat or your lamb, and the priest was required to go and process it for you and get it ready. And as it began to cook, a servant from the priest would come with this special hook and look in there and reach in and snatch out. And whatever he snatched out, he would keep it. He would take it to the priest, and the priest would go, all right, man, dinner time, lunchtime, breakfast time. Now, they were not allowed to do that. God had actually given them the right to take a portion of the offerings, but they were not allowed to do it like this. This is ripping people off, taking all of that meat as much as they could. They'd scoop in and pull out. So they're cheating the people. Also in verse 15, before they burned the fat, the priest's servant would come and say to the man who sacrificed, give meat for roasting to the priest, for he will not take boiled meat from you, but raw. And if the man said to him they should really burn the fat first, then you may take as much as your heart desires, he would then answer him, no, but you must give it now, and if not, I will take it by force. Verse 17, therefore the sin of the young men, that's Hophni and Phinehas, was very great before the Lord, for men abhorred or hated the offering of the Lord. So these guys were actually, as people were walking up to sacrifice their meat, these two priests or their servants were stopping people and saying, no. Before you burn the fat off, give me as much. I'm gonna take as much as I want from it. And if the person sacrificing said, no, we're supposed to burn the fat first, and then you can have some of that, then they would actually be told by the priest or the servant at the priest, like going to church, they would say, you either give it to me, or you're going to catch a beat down and I'm taking what I want. They were threatening them. Now, the equivalent of this would be you showing up to revival next Sunday and you decide, I'm not going to that crazy high school class anymore. I'm going into the sanctuary. And you go into the sanctuary, and in there, as part of the service, they pass around bags. And the bags are for you to put money in. And so let's say you're sitting there with your family, and there's your dad at the end of the pew, the seat. And as the ushers come around and they begin to pass a bag, your dad starts to pull out some money, to put some money in there. And the usher snatches the money and says, how much you got here? You got $100? Okay, I'm taking 80 here. You can have the rest. And if your dad protested and said, no, hey, what are you doing? No, you can't have that money. That's for the Lord. Then the usher, imagine the usher grabbing your dad by the shirt and say, man, you're going to give me that money or else. It's curtains. Killing you. Wild. That's what was going on. This was their church setting. And people were showing up to church and getting robbed. Isn't that wild? That's crazy, man. But I've seen some crazy things over the years from churches. It's true. A lot of people do not like Christian churches because they say, man, they're always asking for money. Now, just so you know, we've got that little box that's on the wall there, right in between the light switch and the fire alarm. See that little red fire alarm? When you walk by, just pull that. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Okay, that black box that says offerings on it. You can actually put money in there if you want. It doesn't go to me. I don't use that, to buy dog food or put gas in my car. I don't even have the key to that. Other church leadership, they'll come through all the rooms. Those are in all the rooms. And they will open that up and collect something if it's in there. But if you ever go, you know what? I want to give some money to the Lord. I just want to give some money to the church. Give it to the Lord. You can put it in there. I don't know about it. I don't see it. I don't have a clue. I don't get a report, that, well, Josh, he brought some money, but Ella brought more. So I don't know. I don't have a clue. Okay? So if you ever want to do that, but we don't ask for money in here. But I've seen some craziness. Now, if you've always gone to revival, you've always been here, you may not have seen the craziness because the only time you're going to hear about money in the main church is when at the end of worship, they'll say, okay, the ushers are going to pass the bags. And that's it. There's nobody there like, hey man, how much did you put in? Let me see. Let me count that. We don't do that. But you may have seen some stuff on social media of some churches doing some wild stuff. I've seen some of it. I've been a Christian for a lot of years now. I've seen some wild stuff, like a pastor stepping up and going, okay, we're going to take an offering right now. Ushers, lock the back doors. Nobody gets out. This is serious. Lock the back doors. Nobody gets out. Nobody leaves until there's $10,000 in the offering. Let's go right now. Dig deep. Serious. Craziness. Or they'll go through, okay, the offering's coming, and they'll pass the bags around, and then they'll get the bags back, bring it up to the front. Pastor looks in. There's not enough. Send it around again. Let's go, people. Put more in. I've been in church before. I won't tell you which church. I have been in a church before where the leader at the church said, listen, the bags were coming along, and they had these, it's the funniest thing, they had long sticks with a basket at the end of it. So they weren't handing the basket to anybody. It was like, nobody touches the money. But the usher would come, and he would just go down from each pew, and he would just pass it in front of you. And you don't touch it, you just put your money in, and then they pull it back. But I've heard before, I was sitting in church, and the church leader was like, hey, the ushers are going to come by, and they're going to collect the offering, and listen, we want to hear paper, not coins. Let's go. It's like, fool, I'll throw a receipt in there, man. What? Crooked. Some crazy stuff that happens in churches. And that's what was going on here. And these are supposed to be the servants of God, but you and I know, we read verse 12, they didn't even know the Lord. Maybe their dad did, but they didn't. And so there's all this craziness happening here. Well, God's not happy about it. And so he's going to set things straight. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But let's take a quick look at Samuel. In light of these problematic priests, sons of Eli, Samuel is not a problematic priest. But what we're getting is a contrast to them, to all that craziness. Verse 18, but, see the word but? That's what we call a big but. Because we're learning about the priests, and that's bad news. But here's something different. Verse 18, but Samuel ministered before the Lord, even as a child wearing a linen ephod. What's a linen ephod? He had a little linen robe. Doesn't that just sound so cute? It's like, oh, look at that little boy, man. He's got his little linen robe on, and he's just serving the Lord. One of the many things that I love about Christmas is the Christmas choir here. And some of you have been in the Christmas choir. And what I love, there's lots of things that I love about Christmas and about the choir, the music, the songs. But one of the things that I love is seeing all the little kids come out to sing, man. And they're all dressed up. And, the little girls have their stockings on, but one's all baggy. And, they got jackets, sweaters on, and they're just all dressed up. And they just look so extremely cute. We go, oh, man, look at all the little kids. Well, here's Samuel. He's ministering to the Lord, and he's wearing his little linen robe, special little garment. You go, where'd he get a little linen robe? Look at this in verse 19. Moreover, his mother used to make him a little robe. That's why I think he was not a teenager, because some of you, some people think he was maybe 12, 13 years old. Some of you at 12 or 13, you were like grown men already, taller than me. Not that that's hard to do, I'm short, but I think he was a little guy. And it says in verse 19, his mother used to make him a little robe and bring it to him year by year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifices. So every year when his mom and dad would come back, she would bring him a new robe, a little bit longer, because the one that he had from before was getting short. And so in verse 20, and Eli would bless Elkanah. So the contrast is that you have these crooked priests, but then you've got Samuel, little boy, serving the Lord. The real deal. Verse 20, and Eli, that's the priest, would bless Elkanah and his wife, that's Hannah. And this is what he would say, the Lord give you descendants from this woman for the loan that was given to the Lord. In other words, may God bless you with more children because she gave her son to the Lord, Samuel. Then they would go to their own home. And in verse 21, the Lord visited Hannah. That means he gave her the ability to get pregnant, so that she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. She went from having no kids, no ability, to now she's got this full family. Meanwhile, the child Samuel grew before the Lord. Verses 22 to 25, we go back to the sons of Eli. Here's what happens. Now Eli was very old, and he heard everything his sons did to all Israel. Heard about it. And how they lay with the women who assembled at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. What? They laid with them? What it means is that these 2 priests, these crooked priests, these problematic priests, Hophni and Phinehas, remember, they didn't know the Lord. They looked like they knew the Lord. They had the clothing on the outside, but they didn't know the Lord. They were not the real deal, not genuine. And what they were doing is they were actually having sex with the women that were coming to the tabernacle. Craziness. Ripping people off, taking their food, taking their money, and taking these women. I mean, the whole thing was corrupt. Payments coming. But it says here in verse 23, he says to them, here's what their dad says to them. Why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all the people. No, my sons, for it is not a good report that I hear. You make the Lord's people transgress. And he says to them, if one man sins against another, God will judge him. At least God's judge. But if a man sins against the Lord, he's saying that's what you guys are doing, who's going to intercede for you? Nevertheless, they didn't listen to the voice of their father, because the Lord desired to kill them. Whoa, things just got really serious. They're ripping everybody off. And now we learn at the end of verse 25, after their dad scolds them, they didn't listen to their father, and the Lord desired to kill them. Now that's kind of concerning for us. We go, wait a minute, I thought God was good, and he didn't like to kill people. No, this is called justice. Remember, we talked about that earlier. God is just. And it is unfair and it is sinful for these priests to be ripping off the people of God, stealing their food, stealing money, taking women, working all of this wickedness. And so God now is saying, okay, that's it. I'm done with them. I'm going to eliminate these guys. There was no turning. They had no interest in turning from their sin. And so God is going to make things right. But they didn't listen to their dad. Now you think about that. Their dad scolded them. That was it. What should he have done? I feel like he probably should have just told them, you're no longer priests. Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back. No more, no more, no more. Go. But he didn't. All he did was scold them. But he left them in place. He's going to pay for that. But let's look at Samuel one more time in this section. Not a problematic priest. But we've got a contrast. Verse 26. And the child Samuel grew in stature and in favor both with the Lord and men. Wow. You know, you've heard the Bible verse, bad company corrupts good morals. It's a warning that we have to be careful with the influences that we allow into our lives, because somebody that's bad company or has bad morals, they can influence our good morals. They can influence us for bad, for evil. We don't want that. We've got to be careful of that. But notice, Samuel is growing up in this environment with a weak high priest, Eli, and these two wicked priests, Hophni and Phinehas. And as a little boy, he could have looked up to them and said, oh, I want to be just like you one of these days. But he didn't do that. Instead, as these guys, Hophni and Phinehas, and even Eli, were devolving, they were not growing stronger, they were getting worse as they got older. As he's growing, he's getting stronger. So as his body is growing in stature and he's getting bigger, his ministry to the Lord, his faith, his reliability, all of it is growing in the Lord. That's the contrast. Just because I am surrounded by bad company does not mean that I have to go along with them. This is what we would call in the world, but not of the world. You and I are surrounded by it. We've got it on our TVs, on our phones, our computers, our tablets. We've got it at school. We've got it everywhere that we go. We've got bad influence. That does not mean that we have an excuse to live wrong. Samuel didn't fall for it. He fixed his eyes on the Lord and stayed true to God. Now, let's look at our third and final section, which is the prophecy here. And this comes for Eli. Verse 27, beginning at verse 27, and going down to verse 29, we see he starts with questions. It says, then a man of God came to Eli. We don't know who the man of God was, just somebody that God was using. Then a man of God came to Eli and said to him, thus says the Lord, did I not clearly reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? Did I not choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon my altar, to burn incense, and to wear an ephod before me? And did I not give to the house of your father all the offerings of the children of Israel made by fire? He starts by asking questions. You go, what is all this? What God is reminding Eli of is this. He's saying, hey, I chose Aaron way back in Egypt. I chose Aaron to be the priest and his family to be the family of priests. This guy, Eli, and his sons are from that family. And what God is saying is, I chose your family to be priests. Didn't I do that? Of course he did. Yes, he did that. He even says there in verse 28, didn't I set aside food for you guys also as the priests? See, they were allowed to take a portion of those sacrifices. But they decided, we want our portion plus more. And they were taking as much as they wanted. They were ripping the people off. So here's another question, verse 29. God says, why do you kick at my sacrifice and my offering, which I have commanded in my dwelling place? Why are you doing this? And then honor your honor your sons more than me. Why are you honoring your sons more than you honor me? God says. There's the problem. Is that Eli should have, he said something to his sons, he should have done something to his sons. He should have kicked them out of the priesthood. He should have said, no way, man. Pack your bags. You got to go. But he didn't. And by allowing them to continue in the priesthood, knowing they were corrupt and crooked, he was honoring them more than he was honoring God. You and I have got to be careful that we're not honoring anybody else more than we honor God. We want to honor God first and foremost. We want to say, no, whatever's honoring to God, that's what I'm sticking with. He says in verse 29, you did that to make yourselves fat with the best of all the offerings of Israel, my people. You just were feeding your bodies. And verses 30 through 34, this guy tells them about a coming judgment. Therefore, because of that, the Lord God of Israel says, I said indeed that your house and the house of your father would walk before me forever. But now the Lord says, far be it from me. For those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. You're not going to be highly esteemed, lightly esteemed. Behold, the days are coming that I will cut off your arm and the arm of your father's house. Now, saying cut off your arm, he doesn't literally mean their arm. He means he's going to cut off their strength. Verse 31, so that there will not be an old man in your house. And you will see an enemy in my dwelling place, despite all the good which God does for Israel. And there shall not be an old man in your house forever. But any of your men whom I do not cut off from my altar shall consume your eyes and grieve your heart. And all the descendants of your house shall die in the flower of their age. Now this shall be a sign to you that will come upon your two sons, on Hophni and Phinehas. In one day they shall die, both of them. Now this prophecy, what he's telling them here is, Eli, you're going to pay for not setting your sons straight. You should have taken care of that problem. You didn't do it. He says, the priesthood has been part of your family. He says, I'm stopping that. I'm going to end it. And God ends up doing that. He ends up stopping that family later on during the days of Solomon. He'll stop that family from being priests, and he will give it to a guy named Zadok. We'll talk about him later when we get into the life of Solomon over in 2 Samuel, but that's going to be a while from now. But he will do that. He's taking this responsibility away from Eli. Not only is he taking the responsibility, he's going to take his sons also, because these guys are crooked. They don't even know God. And then finally, verses 35 and 36, the last part of this prophecy is that there is a coming priest. He's going to replace him. And so it says in verse 35, then I will raise up for myself a faithful priest, who shall do according to what is in my heart and in my mind. I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before my anointed forever. So God promising, I'm going to replace you. I'm going to replace your family. Now, this no doubt had its fulfillment in Zadok, or at least a partial fulfillment. It's another prophecy, right? So Zadok was going to get that responsibility, that privilege. But it also could partially refer to Samuel, because Samuel is not a priest, but he is going to perform some priestly duties. We'll see that as we go through. But also, I think that it has its full fulfillment in Jesus. You know, in Hebrews 4:14, the writer of Hebrews said, seeing then that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. So I think that this part of the prophecy refers completely, fully, finds its full fulfillment in Jesus, who would be our great high priest. And finally, in verse 36, and it shall come to pass that everyone who is left in your house will come and bow down to him for a piece of silver and a morsel of bread, saying, please, put me in one of the priestly positions that I may eat a piece of bread. In other words, right now, Eli, your family's getting fat off of all this stuff that you're stealing. One of these days, your family's going to be begging, saying, please, let me do something so I can get a little bit of silver or a little bit of just a piece of bread. So what is God going to do? He's going to flip the tables on them. And right now, they're stuffed with all of these things that they're ripping off. God says, that's not going to last long. I'm going to take it from you. I'm going to take your sons. You're going to lose everything. You know, we've got to be careful, because that's what can happen to us when we put something else in place of God. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen a young man who was all about soccer And I told him, listen, dude, you got to be all about God first, and then soccer somewhere on down the road. You got to commit your heart to the Lord. He didn't listen to me. He put his sport first. And he was told when he was wanting to leave high school and go to college and to continue playing that sport, he told his counselor, I want to go to a 4-year and play college. His counselor said, there's no way you can make it to a 4-year. You don't have the grades. So he ended up going to a junior college. He went to go try out for the soccer team at the junior college. The junior college said, no thanks, you're not good enough. We have a team. Literally sent him packing. I tried to warn this young man, you gotta give your heart to the Lord first. If you don't give yourself to the Lord, then whatever you're putting in God's place, he's going to take it from you. He didn't believe me. That's exactly what God did. Why would God do that? Because he's a fuddy-duddy? Because he's a party pooper? Because he's so boring? No. Because the very best thing for us is to be committed to God first. Everything else will find its place. I got to be committed to the Lord first. And if I'm not, if I've put something else in that place first, what's going to happen is it's going to ruin me the way that it did Eli, the way that it did Hophni, the way that it did Phinehas, the way that it did that whole family, because they ended up getting replaced. God took it from them. Let's you and I be careful. Let's make sure that we put God first in all that we do. Hey, winter camp is coming up real quick. You probably have like